So Evan, is that a real scene behind you or are you faking it?
Okay, we are live and we are recording.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the first Arches Hotspot Funding Committee meeting. It's been a lot of work to get to this point. I'd like to thank staff and Carly for getting us here. I'm Joel Linares, I'm the city manager. I am going to be conducting this meeting for a minute till we get to item number 3, where we identify a chair and we can go from there. At this time, I'd like to do a roll call, and I'm just going to read the members' names into the record. Mike Duncan, Karen Guzman-Newton, Kaylin Jones, Wes Shannon, Evan Clapper, Curtis Wells, and Jalen Hawks, all who are present and with us here this afternoon. This is a committee that has been created under the authority of the city of Moab. It is a committee that will comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. It will be online, and all videos and meetings will be recorded and placed there for the record for the public to view, either live or at a later time. So that said, I'm going to move on to the agenda. I'm going to move to agenda item number 2, citizens to be heard. We've created a record and a place for people to submit those online, and we did not receive any. So that makes agenda item 2 nice and easy. And we will then move on to agenda item 3, nomination and selection of committee chair. And so I will turn this over to discussion or motion to the body.
Oh. Not everybody should jump in right now? Oh, but really?
So we just made a motion to elect
no.
chair, correct?
No, we are discussing either making a motion or having a discussion about who should be chair.
Well, if I may, I know most of you folks pretty well, except for Wes. And Wes, you're kind of in an unusual position here, which might be to your advantage. If you have the time and energy and the inclination and all the rest of it, and everybody else is in agreement, you certainly are a candidate in my mind.
Evan.
What? No.
Your chimes.
I know. I was just getting ready to shut them up.
If there's no discussion, are we waiting for Evan?
We're waiting on the chimes.
Okay, we'll wait for Evan.
I thought you guys figured it out. Jesus.
There's a first for everything.
Can you mute that, please?
Mute what?
The
How?
Evan isn't making the motion. Somebody controlling the meeting could mute him, and another member could make the motion.
I was leaving you guys to figure it out. Did somebody make a motion?
I addressed some comments to Wes and introduced him as a potential candidate. If he's interested, I have no idea what else may be in mind, but I just want to make sure that introductory tender got across to you guys.
No, I got that. I would kind of say, Wes, I don't want to get in your way if you're into it, but running a meeting, you kind of, it takes a certain bit of familiarity to just kind of like keep the ball rolling and that sort of stuff. So I think that's a large duty of the chair. And so I just want you to recognize that before you feel any pressure to step in. I think a lot of us that attend a lot of these public meetings might be a little more dialed on the like, boom, 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 let's bang it out. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to elect Curtis Wells as chair of this meeting. Of this committee, I'm sorry.
So Karen's made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jalen has seconded the motion, Karen, that Curtis Wells would be the chair of the committee. Is there discussion?
Curtis, are you willing and able for this in the duration?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Kalen?
Since we haven't adopted bylaws yet, could we do ranked choice? Do we have that capacity?
What would that look like?
It would probably look like staff having like prepared some mechanism. So
Rank choice would be you pick three, we then give a point tally towards those three and then eliminate based off that process, and you get a point system rather than a vote system.
Let's
Yes.
if I may, since we've got a motion in a second, let's have a vote on that.
So historically on the city side of things, we have a motion, a second, then we have a discussion following the second until that point closes. So I'm willing to call for a vote if the discussion's concluded.
I'm just going to point out that the reason why I would elect Curtis is that he's familiar with this process the first time around, and I feels that, you know, the project's landed with the city. This feels like it's very heavily geared towards the city, and it would be I feel a gesture to give some authority to the, not authority, because we're all in this together, but cooperation that we as the city and the county are in this together. So that's my peace offering.
I can appreciate that, especially since the city has 4 representatives and the county has 3. So
If I may ask, we haven't adopted any bylaws yet, but can the chair vote on matters before the board?
According, yes.
Obviously, you haven't adopted any bylaws, so that would be determined by that. But the idea is that the chair will have a voting right. Yes. If there's no further discussion, I would call a roll call for the motion. Seeing none, Jalen Hawks,
Yes.
Mike Duncan,
Yes.
Evan Clapper,
yes.
Kalen Jones,
yes.
Wes Shannon,
Yes.
Curtis Wells,
Yes.
Karen Guzman Newman.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. I will now turn the role of the chair to Curtis and let him start with agenda item 4.
Okay, thank you very much, Joel. And thank you all for your confidence in working us through this process. So item number 4 is adoption of bylaws. There's a link on the city's online agenda that you can follow. Or I'm sorry, that's for the framework and the the ground rules. The bylaws were sent out via email. Everyone should have access to those. So first thing I will do is probably, is there a motion to approve the bylaws as is, or is there a motion to approve bylaws with amendments?
Chair, is it possible to have a discussion of, I just have a question about one of the bylaws.
Sure. Yeah, Karen, you can have the floor.
Okay, so item 4.2, and I unfortunately I didn't give our attorney the appropriate time to answer this. And ex parte communications. I have a question about that. I'm not, you know, opposed to it, but I'm just kind of curious. It seems heavy considering that we've got a lot of work to get done in a small amount of time. And is this stating that we cannot have any communication with each other?
So Karen, thanks for your question. These bylaws are based in large part on the city's water board bylaws. We thought it would be best to not reinvent the wheel and For folks like Mike, who are also on the water board, the bylaws would be familiar. And so if you find that any of these are not appropriate or applicable, I had the ex parte one or the open meetings, there's open discussion on that. Joel has his hand up, so yeah.
The reason it was drafted and prepared that way is it's pretty standard policy, Karen, for any group that's created itself below the overarching body. So our planning commission has that role, our water board has that role. That's pretty standard throughout policy for any of the group, any group like this throughout the state of Utah. It's completely open for you guys to change. We just followed suit with how things normally flow. If you wanted to change that so that's not the rule, it would be consistent with the council, the county council, how the broader groups work. There would be nothing wrong with that. We just presented what's pretty standard language for a committee that's being created like this.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
So I would add that in the 8 years that I served on county planning commission, I believe similar rules about ex parte communication were in effect there as well. And I agree with Karen in one sense in that I don't want this regulation to cut off any communication between the committee and people. There, you know, a number of these potential projects involve public-private cooperation, and obviously communication with private parties is going to be necessary at some point, as long as 4.2 expressly in effect says, yes, you can have our ex parte communication as long as you acknowledge that as part of the public record. And otherwise, we can go ahead and do any necessary communications in good faith. Then I would accept that. If that's not the case, then I would agree with Karen that maybe it should go. Discussion?
Karen, do you have any additional thoughts or responses to the comments so far on that issue?
Well, I mean, I just reading this: partisan information on any application received by a committee member, whether by mail, telephone, or other communication, should be avoided. So I guess I'm just trying to get clarification. Are we not allowed to speak to each other outside of this group setting?
I think, if I may, I think the way I read it is if that happens, to disclose it on the record.
And it's not between committee members, it's between committee members and individuals who have an item pending before you. Does that make sense? So if you had it would be if it were a planning commissioner having a discussion with an applicant. If the planning commissioner had that discussion, they would then disclose it to.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, then I'm totally fine. I guess I'm.
My reading, Lori, am I reading that correctly?
Oh yeah, exactly. So the ex parte communication, ex parte is Latin and probably esoteric in this context, but when you're talking about, if you look at the first sentence and it says individuals and their agents or other interested parties with a matter pending before the committee. So that's, Carly's exactly right. That's what we're talking about. It would be a person who has an interest before the committee. If you had a private meeting with them, it does not the communication amongst the committee members themselves, although you need to be careful of General Open Meetings Act, that if you're talking to a quorum, that you need to be aware that if you're talking to, and later in your bylaws, you're going to decide what a quorum is. Right now it's set at 4. But if you choose to have it less than that, you just have to be careful about a quorum of the meeting when you're talking to fellow committee members, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, you guys.
And Karen, I think you make an excellent point with the time frame you're working under. I think that removing it is not a bad idea. I don't want it to seem like we put it in there because we're advising you that that's what we think you should do. We put it in there because that's standard policy. With the time frame you're working in and the work you need to do, it would operate without that clause the same as city council is free to operate. You're still not allowed to operate with a quorum or more. But if you're out downtown working with people, businesses, and you're having discussions with them to get stuff done, and you come in and then you're going to share that with the group anyways, because you're going to want to convey that information. So it'll operate like city council operates. If you remove it, if you have it in there, it just makes something else you need to deal with as you go forward.
Okay, so that's a good, Joel, and you guys started to take some time on this because I want to get through it, but so a plan is outreach, right? So if I, as a committee member, am beating the street and trying to get feedback on projects that we choose, how does that look to get that? I mean, I would share that with the committee, but like to get it on public record, how would one submit that? Or what are you looking for, how that's written?
Hypothetically, if we were talking about doing the hotspot funding and you were looking to purchase some lots to do some dispersed parking, and you went and talked to a property owner to see if they would be willing to sell it, and they said no, and you're not even going to bring it up that you are seeking that avenue because you've been told no, under the rules of the way that they're written, you'd have to disclose that, even though it's not something you're considering going forward. It's an ex parte communication you had with a third party. So it does start to tangle it up a little bit. Really what these rules are designed to do is they're designed in a planning commission type setting to prevent planning commissioners from going out, doing their own tours of properties, talking to developers one-on-one. That's what they're designed to do, is they're designed to prevent that. So I don't have a problem with you removing it. I would, I don't want to tell you guys what to do. It's policy is yours to be driven, but I think this committee would operate better without that rule.
Okay.
And I would say we could come up with some type of language to capture what Joel just said, and the fact that just something along the lines of if people are having conversations with entities potentially with a matter before the committee, that they would just need to disclose it at the public meeting, something along those lines, if you're comfortable with that.
Okay. So do we want to adopt them as is today and then amend them at the next meeting, or do we want to make a motion that has some flexibility in it for those changes? What do you guys want to do?
Curtis, one simple wording change, if it's any point in doing it right now, I heard what Lori says, that's great. Instead of saying prohibited in a couple of places, a couple of clauses in that paragraph to say discouraged, because prohibited is a pretty strong word, okay? And even if it's disclosed, I mean, if I read it at face value, you can disclose it all you want, but you weren't supposed to have it in the first place. And that sounds rather onerous to me. So either let Lori suggest better language or weaken it right now. That would be my opinion.
Well, Mike, that's a good point. What we could do is, I'm going to flip back over my screen back over. We could just have it say prearranged private meetings between a committee member and individuals and their agents or other interested parties with a matter pending before the committee should be disclosed at the next public meeting of the committee.
Yeah.
And then partisan information or application received by a committee member, whether by mail, telephone, or other communication, should be disclosed at the next public meeting of the committee. And then what we can do is make the last sentence something along the lines, if other similar communications do occur, it must be made part of the public record by the committee member.
Okay. Are there any other concerns, questions pertaining to the bylaws before we move forward with a motion that addresses the concerns in 4.2?
I have one or two questions, Curtis.
Okay, go ahead, Jalen.
At the beginning of the bylaws, of course, and this is just housekeeping, 3.1B shall have minutes recorded. Who will create the minutes? I don't think that's spelled out. That's my first question.
So city staff will be providing all the noticing, all of the Utah Open Public Meeting Act requirements, including minutes.
Okay, thank you. And
real quickly, Jalen or other county representatives, do you anticipate that these will be noticed on the county's site and recording the minutes in the county's record system as well?
We don't have a county quorum here, so
you don't
think it's necessary.
Yeah, that would be by choice, not by necessity.
I don't anticipate it, but we can run it by our administrator and see what he advises.
And we could also, where it's being created under our information, we could put a link, just a link on your webpage that would send you to ours to get for this body.
Okay.
Caitlin?
The last,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, the last thing I have was next to last page, 7.3 F. The closed session will be recorded but not broadcast. I know there are instances where closed sessions are not recorded. I don't know if they would ever apply in our situation, and I did not stop to look them up, but if any of those might apply, we should have a clause in there that unless it's required to not be recorded by law. Does that make any sense?
It made perfect sense. They're not recorded in times of personnel matters. And so I think part of the motion should be that closed sessions regarding personnel matters won't be recorded.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and capture these changes. So Joel, that was essentially you're saying closed sessions regarding personnel matters won't be recorded.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if we had a motion that contained removal of the third-party contact rule and had a motion that added that language, then we wouldn't have to come back to this issue at the next meeting. It would move us along quicker. Or other issues that arise.
Mr. Chairman, this is Monty Aldridge with UDOT. I have a couple of questions regarding bylaws and how the interaction with UDOT.
Yeah, go ahead, Monty.
So appreciate the opportunity to meet with you folks today and to move this effort forward. One of the questions I have is I want just the clarification of how the interaction with UDOT as the bylaws, and I think it starts in 2.1, defines the members of the county and the city councils, but there's no inclusion of UDOT within that. And as far as vetting projects and going through the project process, based on the legislation, the Department of Transportation has the legislation defines that the funds are to be used by the Department of Transportation with the oversight and the prioritized by the Transportation Commission. And so any projects that come out of these efforts must be a project that the UDOT endorses and believes would be successful in being delivered and can take that to the Transportation Commission in a presentation to seek funding. And so I think it becomes an issue related to how these meetings are going to be conducted and what UDOT's role in that, what you all see as UDOT's role in that.
Yeah, so I for starters, before I turn it over, I would say that I absolutely see the intention to be in lockstep with UDOT on the process to evaluate and ultimately recommend projects with UDOT staff to the Transportation Commission. And so if we need to amend, the bylaws or so that you guys are comfortable, I mean, that's something we can, definitely look into, but the intention is to hold hands through the process, with consensus and concurrence, as opposed to get way out ahead of you guys. And we wind up in September and we still have disagreements between the city and the county and UDOT staff on what projects we should be recommending or what direction we're going, if that makes sense, Monty.
It does. And that's I just want to make sure that we are in lockstep and that we do understand each other going through it. Because as you know, it's our role as UDOT to oversee the funds and then also to make that presentation to the commission for a recommendation for a project.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, when we go, and as you were aware in the last process, it didn't follow the exact same public meeting process. It followed, I'd say, more of the UDOT process where we engage with our stakeholders and go through the prioritization and and it was transparent in that that process was then vetted between the county council and the city council, but not each step of the way as this one currently is. And so it's a different way of doing business than what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I want to make sure that we stay engaged and supportive of the process going forward. And at the end of the day, we all have a successful recommendation.
Yeah, I think I'll just add, I think at the point where if you guys feel like, we're not on the same page, I think that will be front and center business for the committee to make sure that we can accomplish that.
Okay.
So, and I don't, I guess it's more of a question to you, Monty, and then ultimately to staff. I mean, would you like us to see us kind of amend the bylaws to reflect that sentiment so that you're comfortable, or have, do you feel good about it, or, what would you like to see?
I feel good about our conversation, and I think, based on our past conversations, we have an understanding of what, at the end of the day, what we need to deliver. And if the bylaws need to reflect that, then so be it. I'm not an expert on how that should be conducted, given that I don't operate in this venue on a regular basis. And so I would actually defer to the experts at hand, from you folks to see that. I just know at the end of the day, we have to be engaged in the process, and we have to be with true oversight over the funding. We want to make sure that we are successful as a UDOT and as a joint committee.
Joel or city staff, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, so there are a couple of options that we could do. If, for example, UDOT would like to be part of this committee, that's definitely doable. We would have to amend the city ordinance that created the committee, but we could do that next week if the city council wishes for it to happen. Another option is it's a little informal. Well, it's less formal than the ordinance and membership, but we could draft some language in the bylaws about, I guess, if it's a philosophy or just sort of a vision that we'll be working really closely with UDOT in this process. I think that could be appropriate too. It just depends on the level of comfort that UDOT is looking for in this committee, but we have some flexibility. Just let us know what you have in mind. And I don't know if Lori has, I can see the wheels in her head turning too.
I've got a suggestion as well. But feel free to start off, Lori.
Oh, no, that's okay, Zachariah. You go ahead.
Well, okay. So it's my idea is simple and straightforward. I don't, and I guess the question would be, do you need to amend the establishing ordinance in order to do this? And what about, and the idea is that, you could add 1 or 2 non-voting committee members that, are equal in all respects except for their power to vote. And that could be Monty and Jeff.
I believe the ordinance talks about membership specifically. It doesn't talk about ex officio, and it just says the membership shall be 7. And so if we add 1 here, 1 or 2 simply here, I don't know what the consequence would be because they're non-voting. So,
yeah. Sorry, I had it just real quick. I had it on a minimize window, so I just got a note that some of you have been raising your hand to ask for the floor. I haven't been seeing that because I've had my Zoom open on the bylaw document. Is there anyone else that wants to comment on this real quick? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. Well, Carly and Joel, bless their little hearts, have already provided background material about what all this process is all about, which stemmed from Monty and other folks, UDOT's, insistence on, gee, this is the way this is got. We do have to bless and oversee all this. We already have some language existing in documents that accompany this agenda, if I'm not mistaken, and it would be relatively easy to insert a few sentences in there that I think would make Monty happy.
Yeah, so real quick, I think Monty's concern is, comments are well received. I would personally hate to see us have to put more staff time and resources into amending meetings outside of this committee, just because I, based on what Monty's concern is, I really don't see that happening feasibly. I don't see this committee getting out of lockstep with UDOT through this process. And I think when there's concerns raised about feasibility of projects or the criteria not fitting projects, I mean, I trust Monty and UDOT staff to communicate that, and would hope that the committee would be receptive of that, if that makes sense. So I'm comfortable with that, you know, just adding, if we want to add some language into the bylaws that kind of encourages the committee to stay in lockstep with UDOT staff, or however we want to word it. But my 10 cents is I don't think we need to overthink this.
And that's perfectly acceptable to add it in, and probably for time and efficiency. If you're looking at your bylaws right now, maybe now's the time. And it may be something that I was just trying to think about how we would capture it and where you might add it. And looking at the bylaws, perhaps in the initial paragraph where it talks about the purpose, if there's something that you wanted to put. So what I was doing was trying to capture the changes and suggestions that we've already discussed, and it seems like people are agreeable to. And I'm putting it in the bylaws document right now. And then what I can do before there's any further discussion or vote or anything, I can share my screen so you can all see the document, what it looks like. So if you wanted to include something, you know, in the purpose or some other portion, I'm happy to try and capture that as people are talking about it.
Okay. Is it including Monty, if we proceed that way and addressing that concern?
Yes, that should work. Just at the end, you know, that should be fine. At the end of the day, as long as we stay on the same page and everybody recognizes and understands that ultimately it is UDOT and the Transportation Commission that will elect to move a project forward. And we certainly want the community to be successful in doing that and to support those efforts. But that ultimately is where that responsibility lies.
Sure. Okay. Can I ask the committee, are there any other concerns pertaining to the bylaws that have not been raised yet? Questions, comments, concerns, clarity needed?
I have one.
Mr. Jones, you have the floor.
And that is 6.1, quorum and necessary vote, second sentence. When only 4 members are present, a unanimous vote of all members in attendance is required for approval of final action. I couldn't find another reference to other voting provisions. So as I interpret this, what it means is if you have 4 people present, 4 members present, you need unanimity. If you have 5 present, a motion can pass with 3-2. If you have 6 members present, you need a 4-2 majority for a motion to pass. So I'm wondering if there was an intention that I'm missing, or if the intention is actually that a majority of the total membership needs to approve a motion for it to pass.
Hey, Kaylin, which number was that again, real quick?
6.1.
Okay, thank you. Lori, go ahead.
I'll let Lori speak to it, but quickly, the policy idea behind it is on council, you can never pass something with less than 3. You can never have less than the quorum number. And so if only 3 members are present, something 2-1 can't pass. And so the idea being that if the quorum is set at 4 here, nothing with less than the quorum number can pass. So if you had 4 members, it would have to be 4-0 to pass. You couldn't pass something 3-1. But I'll let Lori speak to that idea.
Yeah, no, Joel's absolutely right. And this is something that is completely in your discretion to decide. I think the purpose behind this language is so that you don't have a small number of people deciding and making a decision on behalf of the committee, where you have 7 members. And you know, so if you decide really decisions by this committee need to be made by 4, then you know, if that's what you feel is strongly, it's to prevent the smaller number of people from making decisions on behalf of the committee, and when you have a minimum number of people for the quorum, if that makes sense.
I don't know if I'm not communicating this well, but as I understand it, if you have 5 present, you can pass a motion with a 3-2 vote. If you have 4 members present, you have to pass it with 4.
Correct. Yeah, so that's the quirkiness of having a rule like this. So, and
it could be worded so that we could avoid this, if that's the intention, but I wasn't clear of what the intention is.
right. So, I mean, I think this is why this is all up for consideration. So if you just, you need to decide what your quorum is, and you need to decide how many people you feel should be voting as the body on behalf of the body, whether it's a majority of the quorum or if it's a minimum number of people despite the number of people who are present for a quorum. And if there's inconsistency, as you pointed out, Kaylin, then now is the time to decide what your quorum is and what your minimum vote is.
Then
Go ahead, Kaylin, and then Mike's gonna follow up.
okay, then I would just float the idea, which I can do as an amendment later, that substitute for sentence 2, a majority of the membership, of the total membership, is required for approval of final action. So it would just be 4 regardless of how many are present.
Okay.
I like
Mike?
that.
Evan,
I will-
okay, hey, if you guys are raising your hand, there's a lot of us in here. I can't see everyone at once, so feel free to ask for the floor if you're raising your hand and you're not being called on. Mike, go ahead.
I second Kaylin's idea.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this specific item before we move on?
So let me just make sure, because I'm going to try and capture this. And if people have, if you have a better idea about how to do this, as people have been making these suggestions and additions, I've been making them in a document, and we could go through them before there's a motion or vote or anything. So let me make sure I understand. So Kaylin, you're talking about the second sentence, and which starts with when only 4 members are present. So your proposal is to delete that sentence, correct?
Yes.
And tell me exactly your proposal for the wording to replace it.
A vote of a majority of the total membership of the committee is required for approval of final actions.
Okay.
Okay. You good with that, Lori?
Yeah, I'm typing. If you all can check my if I've captured it correctly. I think I don't type quite as fast as Kaylin talks, but I think I got it.
Okay. All right. Is that Karen?
Yeah, and well, I don't know if we're ready to move on. There's just one in Article 5, meetings and organizations. 5.1, the regular meetings doesn't seem applicable to this committee. It seemed like maybe it was potentially a, again, a stock form.
Yeah, Karen, you're right. A lot of times we put that in so that we actually ensure that committees in fact meet. So you all seem diligent, and it may not be an issue, but oftentimes that's part of your bylaws to ensure that there are in fact regular meetings that get scheduled. But
I'm with Karen as a staff member. I would recommend taking it out. This committee only has 1 year under the document that created it, and basically has a 6-month window on how we're working with UDOT. At the max, it could go a year, and we'll be having meetings, so I don't know that it's necessary.
Okay.
So if I go, is there a general?
So Chair, I recommend removing Article 5.1.
I think we're gonna, real quick, I think we're gonna try to compile all the changes in one motion after Lori summarizes them.
Okay.
So Lori will just note that, and then before we get a motion on the floor, we'll give Lori an opportunity to cite the amendments to the bylaws. If that's all right with you, Karen?
No, absolutely.
Okay. All Are there any other comments on that or additional amendments, proposed amendments to the bylaws? Question for county and city staff, real quick. Joel, you've brought up some concerns regarding efficiency, which or I guess comments regarding efficiency, which I appreciate. Is there anything else in here that you see that we could do without that would help in that regard that you would recommend for Zachariah?
No, I think the red flags I had on mine, you guys have hit. So I think that what you're presenting at this point looks good.
Zachariah, do you have any other comments?
I don't see anything in the bylaws. I think it's going to be a function of how efficient you can be in conducting the meetings.
Okay, I won't take that personal, Zachariah.
It's a challenge.
Okay, well, with that being said, Lori, you ready to take a first shot at citing the amendments to the bylaws, and then we can follow that up with a motion from the floor?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and actually I'm going to scroll to the beginning. And what I think I'll do is, I think for efficiency's sake, if everyone's okay with this, I'm going to go, we'll scroll through all the changes that I've made, and we'll get to the end once we've looked at them and you agree that I've made them as we discussed. And then you can someone can make a motion for the bylaws to be approved as amended. And if there's disagreement about the amendments, we can talk about it each one if we need to. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay, everybody can see the bylaws?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think the first changes, and I did red line so everybody can see. Hopefully I captured this correctly. Jalen's comment at 3.1B, it's just a notation that the minutes would be recorded by the City of Moab recorder.
Okay.
Okay, so then we get to 4.2. And if you don't like how I worded this, but essentially, as Mike had suggested, taking out the language on the prohibition and replacing it with shall be disclosed. Actually, I'm going to make them all consistent. Say it's but disclosed by, oops, sorry. Cursor didn't move. Hold on a second. By the committee member at the next public meeting of the committee. So that language is repeated again in the next sentence. And then the final sentence, again, it just is sort of the catch-all. If other such communication does occur, must be disclosed by the committee member at the next public meeting of the committee. Captured correctly, most people think? Okay.
Yes.
And so that we don't have a heading on the start at the end of a page, I'm just going to put a paragraph in there. So we've taken out section 5.1 regarding the regular meeting schedule, and then I've renumbered the following paragraphs so that the numbering is accurate. And then with section 6.1, we've got the change in the number of votes. And Kaylin, is this correct? A vote of a majority of the total membership of the committee is required for a motion to pass.
Yes, you captured it. Thank you.
Okay, good. And then was formatting still looks good. I think, is that it?
And then we were going to try to do something for purpose, under purpose, and to have something in terms of a partnership and an agreement with the UDOT with this committee.
Okay, let me finish up with the last one. And Karen, you're right. So if we go, this was, and actually this was just a formatting change that we'll accept that it wasn't accepted in the draft you were sent. So this is 7.3, 7.3F. We just agreed to make sure it's noted that closed sessions regarding personnel matters shall not be recorded.
Yep.
Okay, so going back up to purpose, this is where I'll need the committee to decide what language they would like to add to the purpose. And I will leave that to you. And once there's some type of consensus, I can add it if you want to add it to the purpose or if you wanted to add it someplace else.
Yeah, I think if we could just add that to the purpose, that would be sufficient. I think we're all on the same page. And, something to the effect of it is in the interest of, the committee to, maintain, agreement or consensus in the direction of the committee or in the subsequent recommendations with UDOT, something like to that effect, I guess.
Okay, Curtis, you give me more credit than I'm due. I got part of that because I was going to form it in a.
Okay.
So it is the committee's intent to.
I guess to maintain like alignment, something like that, or with UDOT staff. Regarding, project review and selection.
Can you see that I'm looking at the letters while I'm typing? Hopefully not.
At least you're not doing it one fingered, are you?
Yeah, no. Okay. It is the committee's intent to maintain alignment with the Utah Department of Transportation staff regarding project
review and selection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Staff, please let us know if you get wildly uncomfortable with something here. Does that capture it?
How about adding after review and selection and to ensure that the committee has a viable project for UDOT staff to present to the Transportation Commission, something like that. I think I heard that in Monty's comments.
Yes, that's a good addition.
Monty, is that sufficient for you guys?
Yeah, quite frankly, I probably will want to visit. I got the bylaws just a few minutes before I stepped into our STIP workshop today, and I wasn't able to get back to it until just before this meeting. And so I do believe, as I wasn't able to vet that, that concern with anybody else, but I believe that definitely gets us on starting off on the right foot. And if there is something that I am missing, if we have an opportunity, I would like to bring that up in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, following meetings, once we get down the road, if we feel like we need to make amendments to the bylaws, so everyone's happy and comfortable, we can do that to a certain degree, I would think.
Okay.
Okay, if that's it for the review of the amendments, can we get a motion on the floor to approve the bylaws with the following amendments?
I would make a motion. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes.
Okay. I would move to approve the bylaws of the Arches Transportation Hotspot Funding Committee as amended per the discussion. Will that do it?
Yeah, that's sufficient. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Councilmember Guzman Newton. Do we have discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a roll call vote if I can fix my screen out of the sharing. Exit full screen.
You might have to get the sharer to stop sharing.
Lori, can you stop sharing?
There
we
you go.
Okay, I'll call for a roll call vote. Councilmember Karen Guzman Newton,
Aye.
Wes Shannon,
Aye.
Councilmember Clapper,
Yes.
Councilmember Hawks,
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Yes.
Councilmember Wells, aye. It's a unanimous vote in support of the adoption of the bylaws. Next up on the agenda, item 5 is overview of committee process, framework, and schedule, briefing, and possible action. The first document is the proposed hotspot funding process framework. There's a link to that document on the city's agenda. Has everyone received that document, had a chance to review it?
Yes.
Okay, do we, who wants to lead us through the document?
So Curtis, I was under the impression that UDOT might be having some information to share. Is that Monty? Is that correct?
Not on this document, further down on
Okay.
agenda item 6.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry.
And may I just ask a quick question? I have a 3 o'clock, and I was just wondering if you need me to stay on the meeting, I'm more than happy to. If you think there's other questions that might come up that need me. But if not, I will drop off.
Okay. Well, I think we should be okay, unless there's objections from others.
Thanks, Lori.
You're welcome. So what I'll do is I will send a clean copy to the chair to sign the bylaws, so you'll have them for your next meeting.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori.
Everybody.
And Kurt, when you were talking about going through the document, you were talking about the proposed framework was the one that you wanted to run through?
Yeah, I mean, so it's on the agenda for briefing and possible action. I'm assuming that action is if we want to change that. And I guess approve that as, you know, as agreed upon framework to work through the process. So I guess, you know, we've adopted bylaws for our committee. Now it's time to agree on a framework to work through this process. I believe city staff took the lead on putting together the framework, Joel and Carly. And so I guess, you know, a good way to work through it is let's just entertain comments or questions on the document itself, and then get a motion on the floor to approve it. You know, this is something that could be amended down the road, but this just gives us some markers to follow so that we have a structure to work through the process.
Sure.
And everyone, feel free to take a minute. I just forwarded it to another member on the committee that was requesting it. If we want to just take a minute to review it, a couple minutes, that's fine too.
Yeah, I like the top part. I was just combing through the schedule again. So
Joel and I did prepare this just for some background. Curtis is absolutely right. This is going to be a living document because the schedule will depend on what kind of projects are being evaluated. You may not have to meet as much as is anticipated in the current schedule. I just wanted to identify opportunities to meet in case that's what it was turning out to look like. And we were just giving generally a beginning. We know where we're starting because UDOT has requested that we produce a project list by the end of April. So we know we need to get that done by next week. And we know we have a September 1st deadline, and we want both Grant County Council and Moab City Council to approve and recommend the project that this committee recommends. So it's flexible how it unfolds from those 2 points. And there is some other work that's probably valuable to do, which is not just identifying projects for selection, but also understanding criteria in how we will use different criteria to evaluate the projects, which will be determinative to project selection. And yeah, so with that, Joel and I can answer some questions. We got some valuable input from Zachariah as well. And UDOT has seen this, and I'm sure they have thoughts. But we've talked about it with Zachariah and with UDOT. And the city council, our city council also was briefed on it and comfortable with it.
Yeah, and this was included in our packet for Tuesday's county council meeting for the appointment of the committee members. So I appreciate you guys getting that in for us.
Great.
And is this an action item or is this just for review?
It doesn't have to be an action item. I think it doesn't have to be so formal as that, because I just see this as a working document and for our information, so we're feeling like we're on the right path. If anyone, I wanted the opportunity for anyone, if they had strong feelings about something or any insight, just the option if you wanted to take some sort of action.
It looks great to me. I don't see any need for edits.
Okay. Do we have any other comments on this from committee members?
I guess I have a comment. So and this might be directed to Monty. So by next week, we have to have everything on our list that we would like to continue to discuss. Is that correct? For new projects?
What we would like to have is, what's included, what are the potential projects that are included on the short list that you would continue to vet and develop concept on. Ultimately, when we go to the Transportation Commission, we would need to have a concept, a good concept and a concept estimate of what it would take to actually see the project delivered. And so we would like to understand what projects we're going to pursue between now and September.
Right. I guess my only concern would be the fact of, where I feel like there is why we're here now is the public input part of the process. And so if we have just until next week to try to get anything and everything that we would potentially throw in the pot, that could be a very advantageous, I don't know how reasonable of a goal that is.
Yeah, okay. Maybe this would be a good opportunity to provide a brief overview of what we're doing in regards to public input.
And I can speak to that too. You can see that there's some public engagement overlaid where we want to make sure we're having the input like envisioned for each meeting. We have developed a website that's still in development, but it's up currently for information. I think we have in mind surveys. It's difficult to do traditional public engagement in these current times, but maybe that will change over the summer. And our communications director, Lisa Church, is developing a public engagement plan, which we hope to share with the county and UDOT if they would like to use it too. So we have some cross promotion across those platforms. Yeah, and I mean, it depends on what the project list narrows down to. So if it's envision scenarios where we try to have a public hearing, or we try to do like smaller workshops, or to try to understand, impacts and public attitudes towards certain things. That's still in development. And we can, I know we were looking to have some public engagement ahead of this meeting, but there was concern about creating unrealistic expectations regarding potential projects, because, and I think there was some concern about throwing something like the bypass out there again, when perhaps that's not terribly realistic given funding realities for UDOT. We can try, we can try to get something cooking this week, and then meet maybe by, I'm looking at my calendar here, maybe it won't be April 30th, but it might be May 1st, and I don't know if, I don't want to put UDOT on the spot. That they might give us an extension on the project list, but yeah, we can try to kind of cook something up, or if UDOT is able to be flexible and give us a couple more weeks, we certainly can get some information.
Well, one of the, just real quick, the way that read to me, see if that makes sense to everyone else, is UDOT does want, they do want us to be, you know, timely in narrowing the scope of projects, you know, to be explored. And the public engagement part of that, I guess, is in my mind was more of feedback on that list that we deliver to them as we move forward, as opposed to the like creation of new projects to be added to the list. We do have on the agenda today number 7, which is preliminary identification of projects to be evaluated. And we've discussed with UDOT staff, you know, before that, we're basically going to look at the previous list and then any other projects that, you know, can come up from this committee. And if there any of those get traction, then they may end up on the list. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't see the public engagement process that takes place between now and the end of the month is necessary having to play a role in putting new projects on the list. As committee members, with all the discussions we've gone through in the last 3 months, we've been pretty good conduits in receiving that information from constituents about what they like and we don't like. I feel like we do have enough information moving into the next week of work to kind of go to work on that list, but that the public engagement is going to be really helpful as we move towards move forward in reviewing and ultimately selecting those projects in conjunction with UDOT prior to the September 1st date, if that makes sense. And maybe that's not what Karen had in mind or others had in mind, but the clock is ticking.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Zachariah had his hand up beforehand, but I want to second that, and hopefully this is acceptable to Monty. It's clear to me that, for example, we'll talk about this in a moment, I hope, but of the 11 projects on the list, I had it cut down to 4, more or less. Was to some extent they're interlocking, and clearly we need public input on, you know, any people who are going to be saying, you're not really going to take this particular thing off the drawing board, are you? And get that much out of the way. And then later on, when we start to get into details about which of the projects we'll actually select and how they might interlock, there'll be another round of public engagement there on a little more detail. So that's what I would ask Monty for his blessing on.
Yes, that's pretty much what we had in mind, is that there are some projects on the previous list that are certainly, you know, projects, you know, that UDOT it's in the wheelhouse that we're comfortable with and would be able to have confidence it could be delivered. And then if there are some others, you know, I know transit and shuttle has been discussed. If there's others that you wanted to add to that, I see it as being a short list of what to pursue. I don't see it as being the final decision by any means between now and the next week. There is an opportunity to vet those projects, but you know, I would use your discretion in adding projects to the list that you have confidence in that there could be good public support and that they meet the criteria set forth by the legislation and that they could be delivered with the funding category that we have to work with.
Okay.
So I believe there's an opportunity to put some projects in that box or in the short list, whatever you want to call it, and along with what's already that we can short list off of our previous exercise and move forward. And I think there'll be ample opportunity for the public involvement that you seek with that.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this specific issue of public engagement?
Curtis, I'd
Yes,
like to
sir.
speak if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just letting everybody know on the committee, just as far as, representing the Business Alliance downtown, we are up to about 47 businesses at this point. We've been in contact with everybody. I've been sending out emails trying to make contact with everyone concerning public input on all the projects. Unfortunately, under the climate we're in right now with the coronavirus, it's been slow for people to respond. So unfortunately, I think we're just going to have to get out and beat the street and really make contact with people and get some feedback on all this stuff. So just so the committee knows, I'm working on that and trying to get that done right now. So we should have a lot more information next week.
Okay, thank you for that.
Curtis, just a couple of
Go ahead.
thoughts. I think that the comments that I've heard so far are moving this component of the conversation forward nicely. I would just say I am all for public engagement and trying to make this process as inclusive as possible. I mean, that's just like kind of a general foundational perspective on planning work. But you all know that not all public comment is equal, and not all forms of public comment are equal and beneficial. And so I would just put a question out to the committee members who need to be making decisions. What feedback is going to help you make a decision? And frankly, relatively quickly. So, to Curtis's sort of opening point, the way you frame the polling is going to dictate what kind of feedback you get and how helpful it is. Are you just providing open-ended questions where you are trying to open up Pandora's box and get every new transportation idea under the sun from every community type and project cost, on the planet? Or are you trying to narrow the focus and say, hey, we've got these 5 projects, tell us which one of these 5 you like the most, or rank these 5. And of course, it's more nuanced than that, but I just want to caution you, given the limited time and capacity to do public engagement right now in the way that we all sort of endeavor to do in normal times, and with, much longer planning horizons, think really hard about what is going to influence your thinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
We can start. Oh, I'm so sorry. When a draft of the public engagement plan is developed, we can bring it before this committee, and you guys can provide exactly those kinds of thoughts. I think we would like to have that kind of input of, what do you want to know during this meeting and why, right? What will help you make this kind of decision that we have to make at this time? And then we can start brainstorming and filling it in. And what do you think are the best ways to solicit that information? So Zachariah is absolutely correct that you start considering what you want to know and why you want to know it, and how it will help you make good decisions. So
yeah,
that could be a next meeting agenda item.
Yeah, I think it's, so Zachariah offered, 2 different scenarios. I definitely think it's the latter. I mean, here's the 5, for sake of discussion, projects, that we've moved forward with. What's the public sentiment towards those projects, which is important too, as we get to the finish line, because that's a big part of why we're here, is that element of public support, for the projects that are selected, as opposed to asking people, the creative ideas to generate new concepts and things like that. We don't have the time for that. And So as far as this framework, is everyone okay if we don't just adopt that formally and we just kind of run with what we have now? You know, and if we get to a point where people have strong feelings about the framework, we can make changes to it and, you know, and take some kind of legislative action. But okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Is that okay with it? Okay. So thank you, staff, for putting that together. That is really helpful because we, as we move forward through the process, to have an idea of dates and work that we need to be accomplishing as we move through this. The second item is the ground rules for collaborations and group meetings. I'll just walk us through this real quick. This is respect each other. Listening is important. One person speaks at a time, no interrupting. Respect the group. Every idea is worthy. Make your points succinctly. Everyone has an equal right to talk. It's okay to disagree agreeably. Challenge ideas, not people. No zingers or cheap shots. Disagreement is an opportunity to learn. Keep the conversation constructive. Explain your reasoning. Keep an open mind. Avoid passing judgment. And most importantly, please take responsibility for the energy you bring into the conversation. So that is helpful. These things can get contentious and competitive. So that'll help to, as a reminder, to work through the process respectively. Are there any comments on that before we move on? Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 6, review of prior hotspot process and discussion of conceptual transportation projects evaluated in 2017. This is a briefing and the potential for an action item. Monty, if you don't mind, would you mind providing just a brief review of the hotspot process that took place prior, and then we could get into the projects?
Absolutely. And I prepared to go through that, and I took some notes, and so Curtis, jump in whenever. I mean, there's several people, there are at least 2 of you are on that committee that engaged in the first round. And so I didn't know how much detail to go into. So if I start going into too much detail, please don't hesitate to bring it up, ask me to bring it up a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of run through real quickly what transpired back in 2017 and 2018. Just so everybody knows, I was currently at that time, I was working in our Salt Lake City offices, and I wasn't engaged here in the region at that time frame. And so I've done a lot of research and had discussions with those in UDOT, Kirk Thornock and Rick Torderson and others that were engaged in the process, and I've taken the opportunity to learn quite a bit about it. So with that said, I just want to jump in real quick. I've actually created some notes that I may seek to share here. Let's see. What's the quickest right there? That's actually not what I was hoping to share. But that was on the tab. So I'm not a user of Zoom. I use Google Meets. I'm looking for, let me come back to my screen. I'm looking for the, how do you share an item that's on a web browser tab?
I think you have to open it up, Monty, in your email. And then you would be able to share it. Are you talking about the GIS app?
Well,
maps?
no, well, that as well. Let me.
So if you go to the screen share button, it should give you an option of what to share.
Right. So
and you would select a window of your browser.
Okay, so are you all seeing April 12th, 2020 Arches Recreation Hotspot funding?
Yes,
moving
we
forward?
are.
Okay. Okay, great. So real quick, this has the, the link to the legislation there, and I don't want to bore you with too many of the details, but just highlight some of the things that are really important. $100 million was allocated to the Department of Transportation to be prioritized by the Transportation Commissions for projects, as we've talked about, that have significant economic development impact associated with recreation and tourism, and addresses the congestion mitigation. There's a couple of items in there that's really important for us all to understand, and we talked about that again in our discussion of the bylaws, that it states that the funding is to be used by the Department of Transportation and prioritized by Transportation Commission. And so that's why I brought up the issue when we'd had the discussion of bylaws. We need to make sure that it's not a grant that's been turned over to the Arches area, to the Moab County or Moab City and Grand County. It's actually funding that we've engaged the community with in making those choices. And because that's the way we want to solve problems, is by reaching out to the local governments and have them be part of the solutions. So at the end of the process, we have to have a project, like I said before, that meets the criteria of the legislation and that can be delivered. It's here on item 2, and that UDOT can support the presentation to the Transportation Commission for consideration. To achieve, so previously what we did to achieve the intent of legislation is we convened a series of workshops that had broad representation from the community, and those participants developed prioritization criteria and potential competitive deliver projects that we could consider. And to do that, now I'm going to change to my new share, which will be the actual, what was shared with you all is, that's not on my, there. And going into the story map, which was shared with all of you, gave us a quick overview, and I'm not going to spend too much time in this story map because I want to jump over, but went into this and developed a list of projects and goals and priorities. And this was done to make sure that everybody understood through a process called Decision Lens, to make sure that the group had a good objective way to make a decision and to evaluate criteria. And coming out of that Decision Lens process, and I'll jump into that just a little bit, highlights of Decision Lens, so you all can understand that it's a pretty robust process, and there is quite a bit of effort put into that. But under what you do in Decision Lens, you have criteria by which to weigh various alternatives. And typically you'll have parent criteria, which you see across the top here, the 3: reduce congestion, support economic development, increase recreation and tourism opportunities as the parent criteria. And then under each of those parent criteria are the 3 children criteria that the committee came up with. That's enable and enhance travel choices, improve operations and capacity, consistency with local government vision. And I don't want to, is there value? I don't really want to sit here and read slides to you all. Is there value in me going through each one of these, or you all
probably for the sake of time, we should probably definitely appreciate the opportunity to review it. We should probably get to the projects as soon as possible, because I know a lot of our folks have a hard cutoff at 4.
Okay.
If that's all right with you, Monty.
Sure. And so now that window is sat right over my toolbar, the Zoom window. How do I get that to be someplace else? It's set, there we go. Okay, so real fast, jumping into Decision Lens, and it went to sleep on me, so it'll open up quickly. Jump into portfolio. Sorry about that. I had this open, but it went to sleep on me. So we have the Arches Recreation Hotspot funding, and to jumping into the projects, as you can see, this is the tool that was used, and Kaylin and Curtis are familiar with this because they participated. And it goes through and the development of the criteria is shown here, the rating scales, It goes real fast. It shows how they go in and they provide the weighting to the various criteria of how important they are to the process or to the decision. And here are the alternatives that were developed. And I think you all have seen these lists previously. That's the same list that's in that story map. That in addition to vetting those, having those criteria, we also engaged a consultant that developed concept reports and concept estimates for each of these projects. And then when you go through, you can see the list of the participants that were all engaged, and then there's several from UDOT in the first part. You can see here, Jared Beard and myself have been added recently. We weren't engaged at the time, and so we don't have any voting history there, but you can see the history of the votes that were cast. And then it goes through and it gives the ability to put value to the various criteria. And you can see that reducing congestion was the highest valued criteria that was used in that effort. And there's the ratings. And so that was a very crash course in decision lens, but I guess the purpose of what I wanted to show that for you is to let everybody know, though, especially those that weren't involved, that it was a very engaged and robust process. And the bypass is obviously something that can't be addressed with our current funding. And it's in going down to the list, you can see how the others are rated with the group previously. And so from my perspective from UDOT, when I look at these, and I think, the bypass is off the list. It's not something that we're going to be able to deliver in this process. The Main Street improvements, there was quite a bit of discussion on that. The challenge when you start looking at bike lanes and ped crossings and things of that nature, then those tend to affect parking availability. And that's we've heard pretty loud and clear in the last several months. Main Street parking is still viewed as something that is not really interested at this time and looking at having any changes to. The parking structure, I think we all know what the situation with the parking structure is. And so you can see the remaining projects on there. The dispersed parking, we also have had a lot of challenges trying to get that, getting any land identified. When I mentioned earlier that there's some projects on here that fall in our wheelhouse that we are well versed in delivering. An expansion of US 191 in South Moab certainly fits that. That's in our wheelhouse. It's something that would definitely benefit the congestion of the area, and it does meet the criteria. And then you see the other two is up here we had some bike paths. Those do fit in our wheelhouse as well. How they would address the criteria is probably up to some debate, but certainly worth vetting. Then down here, the Cane Creek Road improvement, I want to comment on that we don't view that as from my UDOT hat, I don't view that as a viable project that meets the criteria. I don't think it addresses the needs of the criteria. So that's an extremely fast initiation as to what decision lens can do for you. We have offered in our preparation meetings with Joel and Carly that we could help facilitate the use of decision lens again if needed. If there's only one or two other projects that aren't on this list that are added to the box, then perhaps that decision process wouldn't require as robust an effort as decision lens. That's something that can be determined. But that's kind of the process we went through. And real quick, so are you still, this is different because when I use Google, I just change what I'm looking at and it changes with you. So are you still seeing decision lens? Do I need to do a new share to jump back to my document?
You're back
Nope.
to your.
Okay, so it did work that way. Okay,
Yes.
so that's the decision lens crash course. And so the steps forward, as we've talked about this already, is we need to define what the list of projects looks like. What's in the box, what's not in the box. include the deliverable projects from the first effort. Like I said, there probably are a couple there that certainly meet the criteria and can be delivered. And then we need to complete a concept process by September 1st. And what that means is the deliverable out of that on September 1st would be a concept or concepts and the concept estimates that to propose to Transportation Commission. So that's what we're looking for. We've provided in the previous weeks, we provided some information that we have Jeff Sanders on the line. He's our region planner, and he did some background work on looking at some transportation, some transit shuttles, and some various other facilities that are being used in Estes Park, Colorado, and in Springdale. Some fact sheets there that can help with a little bit of information. And so we want to just offer the ability for us to kind of help with information of that nature. We obviously don't have the nuts and bolts and details of those systems, but we can help try to facilitate conversations and contact with those people.
Okay.
So that was very quick, Curtis. So
yeah.
No, trying to make sure we have some time.
That's good. I appreciate it. I want to mention real quick so everyone's aware. So we're in item 6, which is the review of the hotspot process, which we've done. We do have in that same item discussion of conceptual transportation projects evaluated in 2017 as a possible action item. But then the next agenda item is preliminary identification of transportation projects to be evaluated moving forward. And back to the proposed framework, we do have a meeting of April 29th of next week, where we've identified the desired outcome is to identify the projects to be considered. And so we've got today to get into it and to get a start. And we've got a meeting next week to spend what I would expect to be the entirety of the process. I'm sorry, even on the agenda, we have the introduction to Decision Lens. Or I'm sorry, that's in May 13th. So that's as we move forward. So the next meeting, we have the continued overview of the 11 projects, addition of new or refined projects, final determination of project lists, and update on additional public input. And so with that being said, I think it would be good to take an opportunity with the committee members and touch on the 11 conceptual projects and see how we can narrow that down off the top as to not waste anyone's time, our time and UDOT's time, if that's all right with everyone. Just as a discussion, we don't have to take an action on it tonight. Or would everyone like to kind of pass the microphone and give everyone an opportunity to talk about all the projects? We've already established that the bypass is off of the list. Monty just touched on Main Street improvements. We do have some data from the parking structure proposal to consider. Monty did touch on the bicycle path, not the shared use path, but that the Colorado River bicycle path? Is that what you're referring to, Monty? Sorry, we're getting a lot of feedback from somebody's eating some Cheetos or something.
Yeah, I just unmuted. I believe on that bike path was the one that was from down the Spanish Valley and connecting into the bike paths up in the Moab area. Would it be beneficial if I shared the screen that actually had this project lists on that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let me do that again real quick. Okay, so Here they are on the left side. Hopefully that's large enough that you can see it. I've got it pretty large on my screen. So the bypass corridor, we check off the Main Street improvements. You know, that's something that's challenging without affecting parking. The parking structures, the shared use paths, is this one here on the, I can bring that up real fast, was the cost estimate. That one was the path that, I'm sorry, let me back off of that. I don't want to jump into that concept at that level. The concept of that was to connect, I believe, in the Spanish Valley area to the up into the Moab existing trails. And then you see the dispersed parking, the expansion of 191, North Recreational, and bike share. Yes.
Monty, use little numbered buttons up at the top center of your screen. That works the best.
There it is. Yeah, you're right. So the item is item 6, I think, was the one that the question was about, is the conceptual, actually it must have been for the bike paths is this one here. I'm sorry, number 5.
And Monty, would you mind clarifying your comments on number 5?
So number 5, I believe, it meets part of the criteria, and there would need to be some good discussion on this within UDOT and our Transportation Commission. I think an argument could be made that it potentially could reduce congestion if it's used from for, say, service employees commuting to and from work and things of that nature. That could help with the issue. It provides more opportunity. It helps expand upon the recreation opportunity by improving the bike path connectivity from Spanish Valley. And so I think you can see some of the items here that the group vetted previously.
This is Zachariah. Can I add to that? So we have an entirely separate and complete story map that has been developed to support the planning around the Spanish Valley Drive multi-use pathway. I don't see the chat window. I can't seem to find it. I'd share the link to that story map if I can, or if someone can direct me. But if for those committee members that are interested in learning more about the efforts to date around planning for a multi-use pathway along Spanish Valley Drive, I can point you in that direction and then also answer questions. I've been spearheading that project. I will note, though, that the project cost is higher than what is shown on the prior hotspot story map that Monty shared. That 2.75 figure was based on the information we had at that point. Our current estimate is closer to 4.2 million. And that is the stretch between the intersection of Spanish Valley Drive and Mill Creek Drive out to the county line. We have begun planning with San Juan County for an additional 2-mile extension out to the Kens Lake turnoff, and that to underscore the recreation component of the hotspot funding goals. And Monty talked about the potential to reduce congestion. From my perspective, reducing or eliminating vehicle trips to the commercial business district is an important component of managing congestion downtown. But I would also note that I think there's an economic development component to that as well, in terms of quality of life amenities, and also to the degree that we can tie that pathway into neighborhood scale commercial development on Spanish Valley Drive.
So what I would like to propose to you all, both for the sake of time, but I think a good process for us to work through this for the remainder of this meeting, is if we could start by some recommendations or comments to narrow the list down see if we have disagreement on those. See if UDOT has heartburn about any of that as we narrow the list down. If we can get through that unscathed, then we can talk about new projects that are currently on the list. And then the goal being we can get into next week's meeting with a narrower scope and kind of do a deeper dive on what's remaining. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
I might offer, Mr. Chair, that, for example, I could give you 3 or 4 integer numbers like 8, 9, 10, and so on to show you what my top dog items are real quickly. And we could establish that from all 7 committee members. That'll help a lot in a big hurry without digressing on the nuances of each one right now.
Yeah, Mike, that I would welcome that. And with that, I'll grant you the floor to get us started off.
Okay, so my top, and I'm only one of 7 here, guys. I have no idea what the rest of you recommend, but 8 and 9 are my top dogs. And in particular, if we can afford the money, I'd like to somehow tie them into some sort of a shuttle system. Item number 10 is a bike share. That's one way of shuttling back and forth between parking lots north and south of town. But there may be other ways of doing it as well. Number 5, the bike paths down South Spanish Valley Drive is another option as well. But basically 8 and 9 with some supporting help would do parking and a very modest shuttle system. We can't afford a big system, but besides the e-bikes, there's possibility of other kinds of electric vehicles that might carry a family, for example. Very quickly, that's it in my list.
You know, I'm not looking at a list that's numerical. I'm just looking at the bullet points.
Okay, north and south recreational parking, perhaps coupled with bike share and share the pass.
Okay.
So would it be beneficial, would it be beneficial if I shared a concise numeric list from Decision Lens here real fast? And Mike, these numbers are a little bit different than your storybook. And so
okay, that's fine. I can do it. So under your numbering list, Monty, it'd be number 4 and 5, north and south recreational vehicle parking, together with possibly bike pass and bike share as a mechanism for having some sort of alternative transportation between those extended lots and the downtown area. They could be e-bikes, they could be oversized golf carts, if you will, that are popular in China and so forth. I'm not talking about a big bus system here. I'm probably depending on nice weather and so forth. But anyway, that's the concept.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Can we hear from more committee members on their view of the projects here, what they like, what they don't like? I'll call on you if I have to. Mr. Clapper, would you please weigh in on what projects you'd like to see us pursue and what projects you would like to see us not pursue?
Yeah, you bet. It's hard for me because I like all of them. I think that, so that kind of brings me to the second column of the costs. And I think that, seeing some of these smaller ticket items coupled together is kind of attractive to me rather than one big one. But I am newer to the process, and so I don't have strong feelings on any of these kind of one way or another, if that's not too much of a cop-out.
No, I think that's fine. So you essentially, I mean, you like to see us couple together some of the smaller ticket items, so why don't we move on to Karen then? Karen, do you have projects that you particularly would like to see move forward, or some that you'd like to see dropped off the list?
Well, so obviously number 11, the bypass should probably be off this
Yeah,
table, right?
Yeah.
King Creek road improvements off the table. 191 South expansion, I am not thrilled by that one. I mean, that seems like something very, I'm sure that'd be one of the easier ones for UDOT. And I mean, I'd like to give a nod to that, but that's, I mean, in terms of, I really want to look at the problem that we have and try to solve for that. So for me, it is reducing congestion and that friction between our community and our tourist. And so the north and south, and I would really like to be preparing ourselves for a very small scale transit system. Jeff, I was able to look at your Estes Park model, and it's $425,000 a year, and it seems more in line with what we would be doing in Moab. The Springdale one, coming every 5 or 6 minutes, like seems sort of crazy. So I mean, I would like to be preparing ourselves for transit, because I know that we're going to get there if it's with this round or in the future. I mean, I think that's where we're going to have to end up going, because we want a hotel hopper, basically, so we can utilize the people who are staying at the hotels to stay at the hotels and bring them downtown. So I like the recreational vehicle parking, because we know that we have issues with trailers. We don't want them downtown. And Monty, a question I have for you for Main Street improvements, there was definitely, we didn't get support from Main Street businesses to pull the Main Street parking off. But again, like in prepping for transit, would starting a paid parking system, like, would that be something that would be acceptable to UDOT to again, help with the issues of turnaround and then with Main Street improvements, can it be expanded? Like, could we have a discussion of having better crosswalks and then expanding the side streets? Like, is that a possible option under Main Street improvements?
Yes, I think that's something that could be vetted. I don't know, in the original process, I don't know that parking on the side streets and the development of parking on the side streets was vetted very thoroughly, if at all.
Okay, but is that
I
out
can
of
confirm that.
scope for UDOT?
Pardon me?
Is that out of the scope of UDOT? I mean, because it's not on 191, it's not the state highway. I mean, would it still be an interesting option? Because I mean, it feels like we would like to get more parking spots, and it seems like we have wide enough side roads that we could do that. And maybe Jeff, this is where his expertise would come in more.
If you wanted to include that in your short list, I mean, I think it's important, given the timeframes, to put what you would like in the short list, then we could take the next step of vetting those. So that would be my recommendation. Because
yes. So for the sake of time, let's, I think you've got your answer there on that specific project, Karen. we want to hear from all the committee members. Yep. Is there any other yays or nays on the list that you want to share, Karen, before we move on?
Dispersed parking, I know it's been a little bit difficult so far, but it seems like that would also, if we're trying to get some equity for everyone, if we could, but maybe we could accomplish dispersed parking by restructuring our side roads. I mean, I think it might be an option as well. So no, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Councilmember Jones, would you mind weighing in?
So my list, I don't have the numbers on my list, so I'm just going to call them out by name. Main Street improvements. I think I'd like to keep that on there, but with a reduced scope and budget. I think pedestrian bulb outs at the intersections, mid-block bulb outs with planting and bike parking, and the parking time limit signage that we're contemplating, and the city's interested in moving forward on, would accomplish some of the Main Street improvements without the controversy. Shared use paths, I think I would like to see that, although I'm wondering if not taking it all the way to the county line could both leave more money for other projects, as well as maximize the benefits, since like going to Arroyo Vista or Spanish Trail rather than all the way, since the bulk of the affordable housing development isn't down at the county line. So this is kind of like Evan. I'd like to have like a smorgasbord of smaller projects, disperse parking, rescope it based on what we know, and then maybe just do the east of Main cluster and Emma Boulevard.
Okay.
And Cane Creek Boulevard improvements. So in thinking about this, I've realized that in the last 2 years, we have seen during high congestion periods that de facto alternates to Main Street emerge because of mapping apps. If there's congestion on Main Street, Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever will guide drivers to take local and feeder streets that they wouldn't normally otherwise. And that's the reality. And so I think Cane Creek Boulevard west of 500 West is actually what needs to be funded, because that road needs to be rebuilt. It's used by tourists during periods of high throughput. And the city can really be a good partner in this, because we've already identified it in our capital improvement plan. There's synergy between us and UDOT potentially, and we have cost estimates. So, so there's some upfront overhead that the city can help out with. And then to continue with that thought, this is sort of early in the bypass alternatives. A number of things were on the table, and it got narrowed down pretty quickly. But again, there's routes that tourists potentially will use that can reduce congestion on Main Street, and specifically that's 100 West. And we've got a number of projects in the city's capital improvement plan, which I can get into detail at some other time, but we could really use help with that. And I think it could help reduce the congestion right in the core of downtown. And I would like to have, so the signature project for UDOT for a couple decade time frame is the 191 widening north of town. The city has a match for a component of that of $1 million. I'm wondering if we can pay for that out of Hotspot. That would really help us out with the COVID impacts we're experiencing. So I'd just like to put that on the table. And then as a, for my last item, active traffic management, this is a new one. And so it's concepts like eliminating the center lane downtown as a turn lane and allocating it to either north or south by a dynamic lane reversal. I realize that may conflict with other goals. Or dynamically optimize traffic signals for progression of the most congested direction. Maybe that's something that's already happened, but I haven't observed it. Or further outside of town, dynamically adjusting speed limits when at high congestion times. There's no point in having people like rushing down 191 to get to town if they're just going to slow down a lot when they get there. And so we have this undivided highway, and if at certain times lowering the speed limit below the standard one cannot impact throughput, but make it safer, especially for the uncontrolled intersections on 191, I think that might have benefit. So that's my list.
Okay. Monty, that was a pretty extensive list, and there was some new, proposals in there. Do you want to provide us just a kind of a brief comment on that before we move on to another committee member?
Just one of the things you need to be very careful about is when we do things on Main Street improvements, a lot of improvements that help with aesthetics and pedestrians actually create congestion. And so those need to be vetted very well. I just want to speak in general terms that could be challenging. The 100 West that may help downtown, some of those routes that are off of the highway, we would have to have some more discussion to see what the appetite for UDOT would be to work on those local government routes. That's something I'm not going to say yes or no to today. I would like to have some discussion with that amongst our UDOT peers.
Okay.
Or colleagues.
Yeah, so items like that, you guys can discuss that, and then when we convene at our next meeting,
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Councilmember Hawks, would you mind weighing in on the project list?
Yeah, I like many of these as well. It would be great to take care of dispersed parking by perhaps doing something like has already been done on Center Street on some of the incredibly wide streets that we already have. I do a lot of walking downtown, and I have noted lately how very wide they are and how much more parking that would create if we did something like has been done on Center Street. South and north recreational vehicle parking is certainly needed. They're not my favorite projects, but I certainly wouldn't argue against them. And I guess my Main Street improvement version would be something about some of the parking being moved to those side streets, not moved, but side streets adding to that. I mean, ultimately, I'll be upfront. I would like to see most parking taken off of Main Street and have it turned into a pedestrian thing, but with little carts that drive people along. But I realize that is way far down the road, and I may not live to see that. I don't know. But I love pedestrian malls. I think they're great. I love the bike path idea. I think it might be a little bit sad to end it at Spanish Trail Road because of some of the affordable housing that is slated to take place south of that intersection. Maybe all the way to the county line might not be in the books this round, but I would like to see it go a little further. And I do anecdotally know several people who will not ride their bikes down Spanish Valley to Mill Creek because it is so narrow and so dangerous. And I do see a lot of tourists that feel the need to ride side by side on those streets when traffic's trying to get past. So I think that would be a huge project if we could justify that. The south expansion, the cost to me is not attractive at all. I have thought for a long time that we needed some frontage roads with control on how people get onto the highway, but that seems cost prohibitive to me at this time. King Creek Road improvements, I would like to see that taken care of with a federal lands access grant. And I don't know if we've been rejected already, but I know there is one in the works for that has either been applied for or is in the works. So those are my comments. Let me look at my notes. Oh, as part of Main Street, I wondered if it would be helpful in traffic. I mean, people tend to treat it like Disneyland. They go out across the street whenever they want. Cars are trying to turn into driveways and businesses wherever they wish to. I'm wondering if the part of the Main Street improvements that had medians with left turn lanes only at the intersection, if that part of the Main Street project would be helpful to congestion and to people darting across, cars darting across, and if that could be preserved in that plan. And that's really all I have.
Okay. Why don't we hear from Citizen West Shannon, just to wrap up the committee members.
Thanks, Curtis. The projects that I'm kind of focused on, obviously is Main Street improvements with some revisions on that. I feel like we could really just take some paint and make a lot of stuff happen with some paint on the road. Just having two businesses on Main Street, we see a lot what goes on down there when it's busy. So yeah, that would be one of my top ones, is Main Street improvements with quite a bit of revision on that. Obviously, most of the people downtown running the businesses don't want parking taken away on Main Street. And then moving on, the North and South project, number 4 and 5, I think would be helpful for sure. And then kind of working hand in hand with that dispersed parking, number 3. And I think those are the ones that we're eyeing right now. So.
All right. Thanks for that, Wes. So if we've heard from all committee members, I'll make my comments pretty quickly here. I think the bike pass is something I'm interested in. There was a Councilmember Jones mentioned only completing a certain portion of it. I'd have to kind of better understand that. I don't think if that was if we wanted to pursue just some portion of that would deter me from being in support of that project. Still interested in dispersed parking. I like a lot of the Main Street improvements ideas. Probably if there was anything that I really heard from constituents as we've been discussing the Hotspot program in the last few months is ideas about how to add parking on the off streets and how that would supplement or I guess enable economic development, just kind of slowing the side streets down, and how helpful that would be to beautifying those areas and adding parking, dealing with the congestion. Kind of what people just seem to reference is kind of the way Center Street is set up in front of City Hall and next to the ballpark is kind of the vision that people have. So that's something off the top that I'm supportive of. And other than that, I'm pretty open-minded. I don't have any really strong feelings on any specific project. I do like the idea, that Mike Duncan and Karen and some of the others that maybe we don't go all in head first into public transit, but if there are some of these projects on their list that lend themselves to a future public transit system as that regional transportation plan process kind of overarches this, if there's a way to make one of those projects fit with a public transit plan. The thing is, we do have a lot of public support for public transit, it sure seems like to me. So but as UDOT's kind of communicated the data and the information and their perspective on that, there are some significant challenges to that. And so, I guess we're past 4 o'clock. I'm wondering if Carly, I think Zachariah had to get off at 4. If we want to try to summarize an updated list, if it's possible, as we head into the next meeting, we don't have to take an action on it tonight. Oh, Zachariah's still with us. There he is. I could definitely use some help in kind of covering what's still on the list and what's not.
So I was taking some notes, but I don't know that I took them perfectly. If all of you don't mind just sending me, then like, don't do it all together, but just sending me your list. Don't use I was using the ones on not Monty's numbers, but other numbers and trying to translate them. But I think I have good just generally, but you just can say, you know, Main Street improvements with some changes, or it can be really simple, just some bullet points, and I can put those together and make them available for the discussion next week.
Okay.
I would just add to that, perhaps you should separate out your recommendations for previously established projects and new projects or new ideas that you want to add to the mix. And I agree with Carly, just to eliminate some of the noise in the record keeping for next week. Just limit the nuanced changes to Main Street improvements with changes to the prior approach. Don't try to list out every single one of those. I mean, do that for yourself to keep record for the next conversation, but just for our purposes of narrowing this down at the higher level, let's keep it at that higher level.
Thanks, Zachariah. Monty, do you guys have any preliminary heartburn on us moving forward that way with those specific projects?
No, I think it's part of the process that you need to do to kind of pull those together and look at it. I'll be having some conversations regarding, like, say, the side street, parking on side streets and some of those other I'll call them off UDOT system facilities, and get some input on that prior to our next meeting.
Okay. If everyone's comfortable moving forward that way, we'll just skip an action item on that and move on to scheduling the next meeting. We have in the framework April 29th. Do we want to just try for the same time on April 29th, 2 to 4? Does that not work for anybody? April 29th, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
So the RTP stakeholder kickoff is at 4. So for those of us, it looks like, so for those of us that are on that, maybe a 15-minute break. So maybe starts a little earlier.
Yeah, that's fine, Kaylin. I mean, we could do, we could start at 1 o'clock just to make it even keel. Okay, so we'll do 1 to 3 on April 29th. Does that not work for anybody? Okay, well, appreciate everybody's time and patience with us as we kind of get ourselves together here to work through this process. I think we had a good productive meeting there. And if we don't have any, additional comments or concerns, I'll adjourn the meeting. Okay, have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.